I'm just going to respond to two of the chats. To Lauren, yes. And to Pastor Phyllis, thank you. All right, friends, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. You are in for an exciting hour with the Executive Director of the Hawaii Conference Foundation. Before Andy gets started, what we're going to be doing is, if you have questions, please use the Q&A, and which should be found at the bottom of your screen if you're on a desktop, or at the top if you're using an iPad or and possibly laptop. So anyway, if you have any questions, please be sure to put it in the Q&A and we'll get to them, I think towards the end of Andy's presentation. So without further ado, let's welcome Executive Director of the Hawaii Conference Foundation, Mr. Andy Bunn.
Thank you, Lori, and hello, everybody. Welcome. I hope you do find it exciting. I'm excited about what we do here at the foundation and on behalf of the conference, and so I can hope I can give you a sense of that as we go along. I will share my screen now, so bear with me here. So everybody can see that, I hope. Okay, so this is the update from the Hawaii Conference Foundation for the AHA, an annual thing, even though we just did it 6 months ago, but happy to be here. So I will be covering, I'm going to do a brief introduction of the foundation, just to remind folks what the foundation is all about and what its purpose is. And then we'll cover our current assets and holdings to give you a picture of that. And then we'll go into some current issues, and there's three issues that we'll talk about. One is our expenses and drawn on investments, and then two specific property issues, Craigside and 1848 Nu'uanu. And finally, we'll conclude by a quick summary of the Bylaws Amendments, which are coming up, which have actually been amended, but the effective date of those are coming up next year. So let's get right into it here. So by way of introduction, the Hawaii Conference Foundation is the asset and property management arm of the Hawaii Conference. It is a Hawaii nonprofit corporation, and it is a tax-exempt charity pursuant to Section 501c3 of the Internal Revenue Code, meaning that we can, folks who donate to the foundation can deduct their donations on their tax returns, and we get exemption from paying income taxes on the income that we generate on behalf of the conference. The purpose of the foundation is to be a foundation and depository for the property for investment and use of the Hawaii Conference of the United Church of Christ, its member churches, and its affiliates. It's to promote the interests and welfare of the churches and the ministers of the Hawaii Conference and of the General Synod and other instrumentalities of the UCC and affiliated institutions, insofar as their interests are within an area of concern for the conference. And finally, and very generally, the foundation is to advance the cause of Christian religion. So just a reminder on why the foundation was created and exists as a separate organization from the conference. It grew out of a desire in the 1950s and the 60s to separate the fiduciary role of money management from the money spending functions of the conference. So it's the classic balance of the program versus the purse. Some separation there is a good idea to make sure that there's proper stewardship of that which we own. There was also a concern at the time about spending decisions by the conference that were then influenced too much by specific program needs, specifically those on Oahu. So there was a desire to make sure that when the foundation is looking at spending function and stewarding assets, that there's due consideration given to the portions of the conference, the outer island associations and conference functions. There was also a desire to ensure that assets were stewarded for wider consideration, including the needs of associations and churches on the neighbor islands, as I just said. And finally, it was hoped that this change would restore confidence among traditional and potential donors to the conference, and lead to a resumption of giving towards endowment for the conference. So that's a very, very quick overview of why the foundation was created and exists, and though that it remains true today. So let's talk briefly about the assets. As of March 31, 2021, and that was the close of our last fiscal quarter, the foundation is roughly a $68.4 million institution, and that includes the custodial accounts we hold for others. The net assets are about $51.5 million. The investment holdings of the foundation as of the end of the last fiscal year total roughly $54.2 million. Roughly 30% of that, $16.4 million, are in foundation unrestricted funds. That is, those are funds that can be used by the foundation for operational purposes. About 7% of that, $3.7 million, consists of custodial and restricted funds held for the conference, for specific uses like scholarship. 5% of that, about $2.8 million, consists of restricted funds held for other churches and scholarships or other purposes. 29%, or about $15.7 million, are endowment funds. Those are funds where the corpus cannot be spent and the income is restricted by the donor for certain specified purposes. And finally, the remaining 29%, or $15.7 million, are custodial funds belonging to churches and other related institutions. Those custodial funds, I might add, are invested for the churches and the other institutions. They are the funds of the other institutions, and they can, use those whenever they need to use those. But we pool those together so we get a bigger bang and a more leverage in the market for our investment pool as a whole. The allocation of the investments as of the end of March was 59% equities, 18.5% in fixed income, 22.3% in alternative investments, and a very small portion, 0.3%, in cash and cash equivalents. So it's a balanced portfolio so that we can hedge the risk from market volatility, market ups and downs, but still get the benefit of market growth. When we look at the real estate holdings of the foundation, almost 175 parcels are owned, leased, or managed by the foundation. And that's measured from the tax map parcel numbers that the counties assign to each parcel. And those include the units of Craigside. About 60 of those are church properties by institutional count. 36 of them are active churches and 24 inactive. About 3,900 acres statewide are accounted for in our holdings. And we carry that now at a book value of about $17 million before depreciation. The real property tax assessment as to that property is in the range of $300 million. But most of these properties are exempt from tax, and many of them are restricted to church use and other restricted covenants that may or may not be picked up in the county's tax assessed values. And other real estate holdings of the non-Craigside properties, approximately 25% of those are held in trusts for churches, and another 20% or so in an implied trust arrangement. And only about 6% are income producing. So that means of those properties, 94% don't generate any income for the foundation. And that's a big challenge because they often come with carrying costs like insurance and taxes and repair needs. Looking at our current issues, the expenses and draw on investment is something that we're being very sensitive to over the last couple of years. Looking at our budgeted operating revenues for 2021, we budgeted for almost $1.8 million in operating revenues. That includes Craigside rents, but it also includes unrealized gain in our market investments. From that, we have budgeted for cash transfers to the conference of $615,000, which leads a deficit. I'm sorry, and then there are the other expenses, the payroll, operating expenses, supplies, equipment, repairs, maintenance, etc., which total about $2.2 million. So that leaves us in our budget of about $1 million in a negative position. That $1 million needs to come from our unrestricted and endowment funds, from our investment funds, to make up the difference. The projected annual for this year is actually, because of extraordinary performance in our markets, is almost $2 million in operating revenues, 1.9 million. Cash transfers to the conference have been less this year, happily, in part because of the PPP loan the conference was able to get. And some good expenditure controls by our conference staff. And our operating expenses are projected to be just under $2 million, which leaves a deficit draw on investments of about almost $6 million for the year, which is actually much lower than many years, prior years. The year, of course, is not finished, so we do expect some additional year-end expenditures to come in, but it's looking pretty good at the moment. Coming back to this question of the draw on investments in order to support that differential, this is the same chart that I shared with you last year, and Corinne Morishige had shared with a number of different gatherings we had to talk about our financial situation, that shows historically how much the conference has, the foundation has drawn from investments in order to pay for program expenditures and costs. And you can see it's had some pretty wild swings and has tended to be fairly high. The average over the 10 years was almost 8%, most of it being drawn from the foundation unrestricted funds, because the endowment funds are very limited in terms of the permitted uses of those funds. This was because of prioritization of both the conference program needs as well as the need to meet escalating property maintenance expenses. And this rate of draw, as we've talked about last year and we've talked about in several other gatherings, is really not sustainable over a long term. If we were to continue at that rate, we would risk spending down the corpus of our investment accounts, which we really don't want to do. So the targeted draw is 4.5%. Really between 4 and 5% is considered a safe draw under good stewardship principles for endowment management. The foundation could probably spend all of that simply on property maintenance concerns, given all the number of inactive and non-income producing properties. But obviously we don't want to do that because we need to support the conference. That is the very purpose and the role of the foundation, is to provide that, to be a financial ministry of the conference. So what are we doing about it? So we do have a plan to get back on track here. It's a multi-pronged approach to increase income and decrease expenses. The first, obviously, is reducing expenses. the foundation, excuse me, the conference, as you know, has done a lot of belt tightening and is working on a much smaller amount of potential distributable funds this year from the foundation. We've had furlough days and have been able to manage expenses a bit better. The pandemic has saved us on travel costs because of the ability to do these Zoom meetings. And so we've had some opportunities to realize some savings and costs, and that will continue into future years. We are seeking to improve our income generation, to build up the corpus further enough so that the operational expenses and transfers to the conference can be funded through the income generated from, safely generated from our investment accounts. We're doing that in a number of ways. First is we're looking at selling underperforming assets and reinvesting them into a better performing vehicle. So such as currently our investment account or a higher yield real estate interest. Specifically, the Craigside 3 project and the conference office building are currently being positioned for sale. Also, we are looking and developing a plan to offering the least fee interest in Craigsides 1 and 2. We're looking also at other opportunities, at other non-income producing properties to see what income generation can be had from them by way of a lease, sale, or whatever arrangement it would take. That's something that we're doing very, very carefully because we're concerned about protecting the mission properties and the historic properties. So the trustees are actually starting a detailed search and study of the history of different properties so that before we make a decision on the disposition of a property, we can really understand where that property fits in our heritage and history and tradition. We're also looking at utilizing underdrawn endowment funds for additional support opportunities that may be had for the conference. The third area of attack, as it were, to get us on track is an embarkation of a capital campaign. Y'all heard David Popham in his update on the conference talk about the priorities of the capital campaign. But we expect it to be a major capital campaign that is jointly run by both the foundation and the conference. And it's intended to take place over the next 5 years and will require the conference foundation as well as the pension boards to work together to raise funds. A component of the campaign will be support for the Generations of Service campaign currently being undertaken by the pension boards, which is intended to support retired clergy. And the foundation and the conference have approved the engagement of a fundraising consultant to do a campaign feasibility study, which will be completed this fall. That's the first step. That's a professional analysis of whether or not it is really feasible to raise the amount of funds that we want and need to raise from our immediate community, the conference community, and potentially the wider Hawaii and even national community. And finally, future budgeting. We're projecting into the future to budget for slowly decreasing the necessary draw from endowment funds, really over a period of about 7 years. Through all of those factors I just described about managing expenses, improving income generation, and the capital campaign. The 2020, this fiscal year we're now completing, 2021 fiscal year we're now completing, the budgeted draw was 7.9%, which was down from the previous year's budget. But it looks like for the reasons I previously described that our actual draw will be in and around 4%. Actually, through March 31, it was 3.87%. I expect that to go up before the end of the year because your fiscal year end always has increased expenses involved in that. But we should finish better than in a better position that we had previously budgeted. So that's good news. And the budgeted draw for fiscal year 2022, that's the year that starts this coming July, is 6.82%. And we've projected that forward to a decreasing number all the way till we get to under 5% over the next 7 years. So the next current issue I'd like to talk about is Craigside 3. Craigside 3 is the 48-unit apartment building, which is now nested within the larger Craigside condominium project. That's a picture of it right to the right on your screen there. And it was built originally as investment and a mission property. It was originally targeted to provide housing for the elderly, but the trustees quickly concluded that that might not be financially feasible, and the primary focus then shifted to provide rentals to affordable and low-income rentals to low and middle-income tenants, prioritizing support for retired ministers, widows, widowers, and church workers. And over the years, it's been used in that capacity. As an investment property, 21 Craigside has not performed well in recent years. The building is 60 years old and aging. Maintenance costs are on the rise. And because of necessary capital investments, net income has been negative for years. This means that rental income is not recouping expenses. The last major unit renovation is now 15 years old, so we are in the process of replacing appliances and doing necessary maintenance within the units. Outside of the units, there's plumbing and spalling work that the Association of Unit Owners must undertake, which actually gets done at the foundation's expense, since we own all the units in the building. And the common areas are dated and need refreshment. There was in 2018 it says 700 here, but it's a $700,000 assessment by the Association of Unit Owners for plumbing repairs in Tower 3. And that project has not yet been completed because the association has had difficult time managing and pushing that project along. And it now looks like that the actual cost will greatly exceed that original $700,000 assessment. That assessment was paid by the foundation, and the condo association is sitting on our funds waiting to complete the project. There's also a podium repair project, which is expected to cost $10 million, which the foundation's share would be about 1.1 million. The podium is, if you look at that picture on your right, the podium is that parking structure feature with the swimming pool and the recreational areas on top of it. It connects all 3 buildings at Craigside and is parking and common element recreational facilities for all the unit owners at Craigside, including our tenants. The challenges of sharing control over maintenance and operation of the building with the Association of Unit Owners has been consistently difficult over the years. Our tenants are no longer allowed to serve on the board. Neither the foundation nor our tenants have authority to make changes in and around the building without the association's consent. And there's been much tension between the association and our tenant community over the years, which is very difficult to manage. As a mission property, the building meets the needs of only a small number of retirees and workers in service of the conference. Presently, there are 9 units out of 48 that are occupied by folks who are in service to our conference. This disproportionately ties up resources that could be directed to broader strategic goals of the conference and mission work as a whole. So after 60 years, the boards of both the conference and the foundation are facing the reality that this is a very expensive mission project to keep up, and that we need to adjust and react and look at alternatives. So as I mentioned before, the present plan is to sell the units at 21 Craigside. 21 Craigside is the address for the Tower 3, our Fort Craig project. The sales proceeds from Craigside will be reinvested into investment vehicles, the markets or other real estate that we think will produce a better return. If it gets reinvested into a real estate position, it would be one that we have much more control of. We won't have to negotiate with a third party about when we do repairs and how we do repairs. It would be a project that we would be able to control directly. The approach to the sales process will be slow. Presently, we're planning roughly 6 units at a time, starting in this coming fiscal year. This will allow us to keep more control over the pace of sales, which will help us support our tenants in their process of relocating. It will allow us to continue to hold certain mission units for use by our clergy and church workers for the time being. As I said, there are presently 9 of those. And it'll permit us to control the market and market pricing a little bit better by avoiding the negative impact of flooding the market with all the units at one time. The project we considered a whole building purchase, but because this is a building nested within a larger condominium project, there's very little desire from developers and outside parties to basically sit in the position we are now in and having to negotiate with an association over control and improvements within their building. The second property that we're positioning for sale presently is our office building here at 1848 Nu'uanu. The building was acquired in 2003 for use by the conference and the foundation when the 15 Craigside retirement project was built on the site of the old conference office. It was an excellent choice at the time. It very much met the needs of the conference and has done so for many years. As you all know, many of you have been here, there's a lot of space. There's room for gatherings. There's ample office space for all the different mission needs and some of our mission partners. But over time, the conference staff has grown smaller, so the building is simply presently too large for our needs. There's also deferred maintenance that needs attention, including a roof replacement, spalling work, exterior painting, and repaving of our driveways. A joint committee of the foundation and the conference called the 1848 Committee was formed to study the options related to the office building. And they looked at potential sale or lease of the entirety of the building to another user and relocate thereafter, or the subdivision and leasing out of a portion of the space to another user and remaining in place and sharing that space with our tenant. The option of subdividing the space for purposes of leasing out a portion to a third party was deemed too expensive and not desirable, as desirable as finding a whole building purchaser or lessee. So in our strategy in terms of positioning the property for sale, this will allow us to really unlock equity that's tied up in the building and reinvest that. In essence, since we can use a smaller building, we could buy with our sales proceeds a smaller building for less money, and the differential that we save out of that would be then invested into the markets and start making money for us. The sales proceeds will also provide the pool with which to use to buy or replace or lease a replacement property. We have a brokerage team already engaged who are working on an offering prospectus for the property. The company is CBRE, which is a very well established and experienced commercial real estate brokerage firm. It's a national firm with very strong local brokerage team. So they will help us market the building, and they will help us find a place to relocate to the extent we are not able to find a property within our church community, because we are looking at that as an option as well. So getting the property ready to sell involves some improvement, repairs of our roof, replacements of portions of the roof, recoating of the sloped metal roof, resealing, waterproofing, surfacing of the driveway, and overall cleaning. I expect probably the expenses will come in the $300,000 to $400,000 range to do that work. In the meantime, as I mentioned, we're looking at relocation options, including available office space within several of our local churches we're speaking with right now, and acquiring or acquiring a right-sized office building, a smaller office building that will fit us better, or simply leasing commercial office space, which may be available in town. So now let's turn to our bylaws, the foundation's bylaws. Back in 2018, the membership of the foundation voted by a 2/3 vote to amend the bylaws. The original effective date of that amendment was July 1, 2019. But the effective date was deferred to July 1, 2022 to allow further time to study the amendment and the related effects and what needs to be done. So the change has already been approved and no additional vote is required for them to be effected. They will automatically go into effect on July 1 of next year. So the reasons for the amendment. The first was to simply update and conform terminology that are used to the current version of the Hawaii Nonprofit Corporations Act. It's very important to do that from time to time in any event, since the law does change over time, and it's much easier to interpret and understand what you need to do if your bylaws and articles and the terms you use are consistent with what the statute requires. The last review and update of the Articles of Incorporation for the foundation was in 1978, and the last review and amendment of the bylaws was in 2010, 12 years ago. So this is way overdue. The second is to simplify governance and reduce administrative bureaucracy, and I'll get into that a little bit later. It's also to protect and preserve our resources by better separating asset management functions from the spending functions of the conference. This is really the same reason why the foundation was created in the first place. The fourth reason is to create a better structure under which the conference has less control over the foundation, which allows the foundation to have more independence to focus on long-term issues, which are more appropriately managed by the foundation, rather than on daily operational issues. And finally, the final reason is to ensure that the foundation will be able to benefit from arrangements that require independent governance, such as conditions imposed by prospective donors. And this is very important. A good example of this is Cone Trust, where the Attorney General has oversight over these trust matters and had expressed some concern prior to our amendments that the foundation was not sufficiently independent enough to serve as the trustee for the benefit of the conference. And we really don't want a third party, a bank or somebody we don't know as part of our community, to be serving as a trustee for funds and endowment funds that benefit the conference. So that's a really important reason why we needed to make these structural changes. Going to the substance of the amendments themselves, first, let me say that the purpose remains essentially the same. The foundation would continue to be to receive and administer funds and securities for property for the purpose of advancing the mission of the conference, including churches and ministers, and including managing of custodial accounts and otherwise. And it continues very generally to be the purpose and mission of the foundation to advance the cause of Christian religion. So the purpose statement is a bit more concisely stated than the earlier purpose statement, but it is essentially the same. The second big, the second change, this is the big, there's two big substantive changes. This is the first big substantive change is here. The board will have 11 voting directors plus 1 non-voting director. 5 of those directors will be elected by the conference. One of the conference appointees will be the council chair, who will serve by virtue of his or her position. And then 4 others will be elected by the conference, either by the conference council or the Hawaiiana. How that happens has not been decided yet. That's something that the conference council will take up in the coming year. The remaining 6 directors are nominated and elected by the existing foundation board. So that would include those directors who are appointed by the conference. This will allow more flexibility to appoint directors to meet background and expertise needs. And the conference minister will continue to serve on the board, but with voice and no vote. And that resolves conflict of interest issues, but permits the conference minister to continue to have a voice and influence over the board discussions and debate. So why change how directors are appointed? Well, it allows the board as a whole to appoint a bare majority of the new voting directors. And that is sufficient enough to create structural independence to allow the foundation to benefit from the arrangements that require independent governance, such as I talked about before, such as the trust arrangements, the Cone Trust and others. The second area of substantive change is that the foundation would change from a member corporation to a non-member corporation. So why change to a non-member corporation? The vast majority of nonprofit corporations, especially those which are fiduciary organizations such as ours, are non-member corporations. So it helps us with guidance. It helps us understand what our duties are, and easier to administer if we are structured common to other like similarly situated institutions. It also eliminates significant administrative burdens and limits duplication of efforts and helps cost savings. This year, we had separate trustee meetings, council meetings, and member meetings. And for some folks who serve on all those boards, they would literally have to hear the same reports 3 times in a row. The vast majority of decisions are already made by trustees, by the trustee board of directors level. So substantively, there's very little change in the decision-making structure by the elimination of the membership layer. The members themselves only have the authority to approve bylaws amendments, to approve the budget, and to select an auditor. So the primary work and lifting in arranging for all that really happens at the board level before it's presented to the membership. The fourth reason for going to a membership, non-membership corporation is that fiduciary duties of the board and directors really remain unchanged. It is the board itself which is charged legally with the responsibility of managing the foundation, and its purposes remain the same. That is, i.e., to support the conference and the mission of the conference. So it really does not change any of the duties and obligations that exist today with respect to taking care of our conference. And the change will still keep the conference in a position of significant influence over the foundation. In that the conference still appoints 5 directors, the conference minister continues on the board, duties remain the same, and the mission remains the same. There are other less substantive changes that are accounted for in the amendments, including more up-to-date language, some structure, better structure on in the bylaws for committee formation, some provisions that make it easier to call meetings and deliver notices of meetings, and some specific direction on action, what to do when we have actions without meetings, telephonic meetings, electronic signatures, recording of dissents at meeting, and conflicts of interest, the things that we would normally have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. So next steps, what's next? Well, the conference will need to review its own bylaws to look at what provisions might need to be changed in order to get those in sync with the foundation amendments. And it will need to also determine how its officers and directors will be appointed. Probably will be a process similar to today. The foundation board at the same time will be reviewing its articles and bylaws in more detail and determining how that affects certain policy and policies of the foundation. And finally, towards the end of the year next year, we would be filing the new articles with the Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs. So that's sort of the quick update for you today. It's a lot of stuff. I realize that we've flown through, and so I've left about 15 minutes here for some Q&A if anybody has questions.
Okay, I am going to. Okay, so we have some questions, Andy, in the Q&A for you. So we're going to go through those first. And we have the staff here who will be reading out the questions to you. All set? Okay, I'm sorry, I muted you. Okay.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, first question, background. A few years ago, those of us with local church funds held and invested through Hawaii Conference Foundation were told that Hawaii Conference Foundation wanted us to invest elsewhere. I was told that was because of how much time and energy it took to manage local church fund accounts. The church I served divested from Hawaii Conference Foundation and put the church endowment in the Cornerstone Fund. Your report for this Aha Paiana includes a description of the purposes of Hawaii Conference Foundation and the reasoning at the time of the 1968 formation of the HCF. Under your administration, Andy, does HCF want to retain and solicit investments from local churches and affiliated agencies of the Hawaii Conference? Or would you prefer we put our money elsewhere? It's referencing the Ahamakua Handbook, page R7.
No, I don't understand why you were told that, your church was told that. We would definitely be privileged to have churches invest with us. The whole point of having an investment pool is to, accumulate all of our resources together so that we can make a bigger impact in the market. We get better fees, we get better treatment, the growth is better, we can invest in funds that might be closed to a smaller dollar amount investment. So at least under my administration, I would welcome churches co-investing with the foundation. I can only imagine, I can only speculate, I don't know for sure, but excuse me, that your church may have been told that because you were looking for a more liquid investment. What we do discourage investment of operating funds. Those are funds that you need on an immediate basis to meet payroll or expenses, et cetera. It's endowment and the rainy day fund and funds that you are looking to set aside for the future that would be appropriate to invest with the foundation. So I would welcome a conversation about that if your church would like to have that.
Okay, another question. Was the HCF able to recoup the money for the legal defense of the title and control over the Hau'ula Congregational Church property for those who lost that lawsuit? This is also referencing the Ahamakua Handbook, page R8.
Yeah, the answer is no, it was not. And it was a sizable bill. The group that occupied the property really has no assets and no way to pay the bills. Even if we got a judgment for the amount of the attorney's fees expended, it would likely be uncollectible. So that is basically being spent as a mission expense to protect the property. And yeah, it's really unfortunate. It's a sore subject for me because you can only imagine what we could have done with, $150,000 with respect to repairing a church's roof or giving it to the conference to develop the further mission, et cetera, et cetera. But in that scenario, we needed to protect the property from being lost to our denomination.
We have a question regarding Craigside 3. Is it possible for the foundation to retain permanent ownership of enough units to ensure that those of our UCC family, pastors and church workers, can continue to have and enjoy the affordable housing they need?
It is possible. As I said, we are not. We're hanging on to those units for the time being, so that in 4 or 5 years, as we see how other unit sales go, we'll have hopefully a much better financial situation, and then the trustees, with the advice and thoughts of the conference council, can maybe look at some possibilities for those units. But that is still theoretical at this point. I mean, the present plan is eventually to dispose of all the units, but because this is a long-term venture and things change, and hopefully markets change and investments change for the better, we wouldn't rule that out.
So there's a question about the other towers 1 and 2. Are the leased fee units with those being sold? And is 15 Craigside related to Craigside Investments?
So the towers 1 and 2, we have 19 units in towers 1 and 2, and those units are leased out already on a long-term basis to a leasehold owner. So for those units, we don't participate in the sharing of costs and maintenance obligation, all that the leasehold owner carries. We just get a straight rental income stream from those units. But the holdings in towers 1 and 2 were identified as properties that by the trustees that we could dispose of in order to improve our investment position. But because those units, those investments don't have as much complexity around them as the Craigside 3 units do, we're approaching that as sort of the next step after we deal with some of the start the Craigside 3 sales program.
And there was a question about 15 Craigside. Is that related to the Craigside Investments?
Yeah, thank you. No, 15 Craigside is a retirement community that was developed by Arcadia. The foundation, Arcadia, is a related mission to the conference in that it was founded out of one of our churches and has had a very close relationship with the conference over the years. But that property was sold to Arcadia prior to the time they built that building.
Okay, question regarding the bylaws amendments. When the Queen's Hospital was faced with a similar question about having their foundation separated from their operations, instead of cutting the foundation loose and allowing it to become subject to the governance of directors not aligned with Queen's Hospital's goals and vision, Queen's instead chose to bring their foundation back under their wing. There are those in our conference who know more about this. Why does the ACF Board of Trustees think this is better to continue with the loss of control over the HCF? And there's also a related question after that.
Yeah, I suspect that they did not have a similar endowment situation where and trust situations where the Queen's Foundation was specifically charged to be a trustee for separate trusts. The scenario we were looking at is where, particularly related to the Cohen lands and assets, where there is an express trust created by the grantor, which the foundation is now the trustee, and the beneficiary is the conference. And if the trustee becomes absorbed into the beneficiary, it can no longer serve as a trustee by law. It loses its independence. So there's a desire to preserve the ability to do that. And there's a related question.
Yes,
Marie?
Here is the related question. There is already conflict within the conference over the ACF recent decisions to prioritize income generation over mission. Won't this choice further give power to those who prioritize making money with existing assets, a la KSBE, instead of mission and ministry?
Well, I take issue that there with the general assessment that there's a priority over income generation versus mission. I mean, the goal is to have enough income generation to sustain the mission without ending the ability to do that. If we keep prioritizing, if we were to keep spending at a rate of 8% or more over the years, we wouldn't have any more corpus, and then it would all end. So it's maybe a choice if spend it now and then we're gone, or preserve it for the future. We're really trying to preserve it for the future.
There's a related question. A concern has been expressed that the assets of the foundation appear to be more and more utilized to support HCUCC functions and less applicable to local church mission. If my memory is correct, when the Craigside high-rises were either built or converted to condominiums, a certain amount of the proceeds were supposed to be allocated for local mission projects initiated by local churches. That appears to no longer be the case. When did this shift happen? And did it happen via an AHA vote, or was this an internal foundation decision?
I think you might be referring to the Mission Memorial Funds, which is where the income generation from Craigside 1 and 2 sales went. Those funds are set aside for the conference and conference mission projects, and then the conference would determine how those are allocated, whether they get allocated towards specific church missions versus other priorities of the conference. I don't know if that discussion of that ever came before the AHA, but that's my understanding of how the Mission Memorial Fund is to work. In terms of supporting local churches, the foundation actually does support local churches in a direct way. The churches that it holds property for in trust Many of them are in financial distress. And in those cases, the foundation has been absorbing some critical expenses such as insurance and real property taxes. We've also been in a position where we've been able to help some churches with specific needs. We also fund through the administration of the State Council a repair program for small Hawaiian churches. So the foundation is still very much in the business of helping local churches on a direct basis. But my perspective on I really do look to the conference to help help me as the executive director of the foundation to determine what our appropriate mission expenses of the conference. Our duty is to support the conference and the local churches, and so we really look for guidance from the conference to help prioritize that.
And a question about how does the foundation consider social responsibility and environmental protection in its investment strategy?
We have a socially responsible investment strategy where a large percentage of our assets are invested in United Church UCS funds, United Church funds, which have, which, as you all know, are socially responsible invested funds. The other funds we invest in also are reviewed and measured by their social responsible investment allocations. So, so the investments there are restrictions on investing in things like alcohol, gambling, tobacco, military products and production. So we choose funds that do not invest in those features or are at least negligible investments in those features. And that's one of the advantages of investing in the investment pool of the foundation, is because we take that seriously. It's part of our investment criteria.
Are all the changes being planned going to mean an actual reincorporation of the foundation?
No, not at all. The foundation corporation remains the same. It continues to be, the Hawaii Conference Foundation as a Hawaii nonprofit corporation, a 501c3. Really the key change is that instead of the conference appointing 100% of the directors of the foundation, the directors themselves would appoint a bare majority of future directors, and the conference would appoint directly a bare minority. So just by a slight margin, the conference board would appoint the majority of directors. So change is really not, it's pretty minor in that regard.
Another one writes, purchased from the Episcopal Church, Iolani in 1959, our Hawaiian Evangelical Association had UCC 21 Craigside. Reverend Abraham Akaka dedicated 21 Craigside Mission Memorial Aina. UCC 21 Craigside has always served active church workers and clergy and retired clergy. The promise of the conference and foundation was that floors 1 through 4 will be retained to Kokua UCC affiliated people. Hiring a resident manager would reduce costs, facilitate deferred maintenance, and ease process of getting overdue maintenance addressed. Please, would the foundation and conference honor this promise?
Well, I haven't seen in the minutes the representations related to setting aside 4 floors. I know over many years that has not been the case. Over many years, we have been doing the Kokua program. Back in 1971, the parameters for the Kokua program was to dedicate, it was to provide an amount equal to about 25% of the net income from the rentals of the property to be used as subsidies for the Kokua program. That figure has been much higher over the years, which adds to the the expense of the mission. So I mean, what took place in 1959 is a hard. We have to take a hard look at whether in 2022 we can sustain that. Things have changed in 60 years, and needs have changed. The conference OCWM is way down. Churches are shrinking. Resources are, resource management is more challenging. So to be good fiduciaries for the conference, the foundation has to make some hard decisions, and this is one of those hard decisions.
A question at the end of this statement. I find it interesting that given the questionable effects of much of the Christian religion, that the foundation would want to retain the term in its mission statement to promote the cause of Christian religion. Would it not be better to frame a mission statement around the term Christian faith rather than Christian religion?
Well, that great question. I mean, I was not the foundation's executive director when the discussion of those purposes, were had. I think that just retains the language of before, and there was a desire not to upset the apple cart, to make the changes as easily as possible. I think it's probably a fair question for our trustees to look at in the future, but that's one that just I don't think was addressed.
How many more land properties are you looking into selling?
Well, we don't know yet. I mean, we're in a position to be able to sell the Craigside units, as well as our office building. Other properties are much harder to deal with because many of them are mission properties. I mean, certainly we're not going to be touching any of the properties that are in active use for church purposes. There are also really important historic properties that we will never sell. We would be looking at properties which are not used, and also maybe don't play as big a part in our history and heritage, and seeing what we can do with them. And it may not be sale. I mean, a leasing arrangement is a great way to generate income, because at the end of the lease, still your property. A lot of our properties are on conservation land and agricultural land. So while there are opportunities are there, they're much harder to realize than an urban condominium unit. So that study, as I mentioned earlier, the trustees are actually doing a historic study of the property so that we can really learn the heritage on each property, so to be able to better make some decisions. That's going to take some time. So that's going to be a little bit of a slower process. So I don't know yet how many we can sell. It'll all depend on how the research goes and what opportunities we're able to develop for the properties.
The report seems to indicate that the division of the Hawaii Conference and the Hawaii Conference Foundation is a done deal. This is troubling for a number of reasons. Our congregational background values the decision-making by our people in the pews. This is going in the opposite direction. We are the church. Long discussions over the years at the Ahapai'aina have viewed the actions of the Hawaii Conference Foundation as the tail wagging the dog. We are finaling this. Matthew 12:25 is Jesus saying that every kingdom divided against itself will be ruined. The past audit has not shown that the Hawaii Conference Foundation was a good steward of the assets of the church. Please respond.
Well, I think that we are not at all divided against ourselves. I think the whole purpose of the foundation is to support the conference and to make sure that there are resources available for the conference to do its mission. The conference was created in the 1960s the foundation was created in the 1960s for that very purpose, and to be able to be in a position to make necessary but hard financial decisions. So in terms of the audit, I mean, our most recent audits have been clean audits. Everything has been in good shape. The auditors have said that all is conducted in according to generally accepted accounting principles. And so even though there's been difficulty and the draw rates have been too high, we've still been able to support the conference, and the management has generally been good. So, and we're looking now proactively ahead to make sure it stays that way.
Okay, you mentioned that small Hawaiian churches can be funded for repairs. Our church, the Kapa'a First Hawaiian, is in the process of contacting contractors for re-roofing our sanctuary and the inside of the sanctuary. The offices have been leaking for years, as well as have repairs. Our social hall is water damaged. Are we able to go to you for finances to repair the sanctuary and social hall?
The state council of Hawaiian Congregational Churches administers a grant from the foundation every year that is specifically for that purpose. And yes, that you can apply to that grant program for funding. That's why that program is there, to provide support in that exact scenario that you outlined.
UCC 21 Craigside is a living mission today in 2021. Ministry is supported through the UCC units here. If the mission is to be changed, how to revitalize its current purpose, please would you involve the resident clergy and church workers and members of our Hawaii Conference Council in intentional discussions about this?
Well, I have been speaking with the resident clergy at Craigside, and in fact, we have additional meetings coming up with not just that group, but the residents themselves, and I'm always happy to have discussions about it.
I'm not seeing any more questions at the moment. Oh, wait, one has just come in. With so much need in our state, does the foundation and the conference have any thoughts, plans, etc., to use our lands to address dire housing needs, agricultural, local food needs? A small church in Kalihi bought agricultural lands in Waianae and now are housing and hiring workers who were houseless. Have we had discussions about this way of using our lands?
We have. In fact, I sit on the board of the Retirement Housing Foundation, so I've been in some dialogue with RHF about potential opportunities to do retirement housing in Hawaii. I'm always looking for an opportunity to do something productive of that nature with lands that are otherwise not being used. Some of our ag lands may be, in fact, appropriate for development of local farming efforts. We've been in discussion with a group called Ag Hawaii, who serves as a middleman supporting local farming and efforts to help our local folks take their product to market. They're wanting to have space or potentially rent space for office and agricultural activities in areas where we do have properties. And so, that would be something that helps the community. Housing is a desperately necessary thing. The foundation itself is not equipped to be a provider of housing, but we're always looking for partners. If we can identify the land who could team up with us and use the property for a purpose of that nature, and hopefully generate a little bit of income while providing a social good. So that's definitely something we're interested in and wanting to develop more of.
All right, we're gonna give Andy a break now. We're a little over time, but that's okay. Lots of good questions, lots of good information. We want to thank Andy for his time today, for sharing with us the updates on the Hawaii Conference Foundation. Thank you all for your questions and for joining us this afternoon. If you do have other questions, please feel free to contact Andy.
Yep.
Great. Thank you, Andy.
You're welcome.
And with that, thank you all again for coming, and we will see you this evening.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.